Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Chris Moody. I'm a lecturer at Appalachian State University and a writer and reporter. And today we're going to be talking about the tech effects on young men, and we have a really exciting panel today. Let me start by introducing what we'll be discussing and our panelists. This panel will explore real-world strategies and public policy proposals to help young men develop healthier relationships with gaming, social media, chat servers, and emerging AI tech. The discussion will examine evidence-based approaches for creating productive digital boundaries and leveraging technology for positive outcomes rather than passive consumption. Certainly something we can all relate to, no matter how old we are. We will go down the panel here. John Cusey is Executive Director of the Institute for Families and Technology. Previously, he served as Senior Vice President at the American Enterprise Institute and Senior Counselor for Policy and Legislative Affairs at the HHS's Administration for Children and Families. Saul Malek is a professional speaker specializing in gambling addiction prevention and education. After developing a gambling addiction as a college sophomore that cost him money, relationships, and nearly his life, Saul entered recovery in 2019 and has since become an in-demand speaker on the topic. Josh Thomas represents Virginia's 21st House District in West Prince William County. A Marine Corps veteran who served in Afghanistan and the Middle East, Thomas earned his law degree from College of William and Mary. In November 2023, he introduced historic legislation requiring parental consent for minors to access algorithmic addictive feeds on social media platforms. And finally, Michael Marinaccio has been a tireless advocate for tech safety for over a decade. Having worked in federal politics his entire career, he started his own company to draw from decades of experience as a strategist, designer, and technologist. Let's welcome the panel. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. I'd like to start off by asking an opening question to the entire panel, so you all can take it as you'd like. But let's start with the landscape here. What are the most concerning digital challenges facing young men today, and how have these challenges evolved as the technology has advanced?
Oh, maybe we'll go. I'll start.
There you go.
And we'll go down this way.
Sure.
So, my organization, we focus on families and children. So I'll be coming at it from that perspective. And social media, algorithms, AI technology does impact boys in a different way than it does girls. There are very different kind of impacts and responses to this technology. But let me paint the picture a little bit here. One of my favorite pollsters is a guy named Dan Cox at the place I used to work, the American Enterprise Institute, and he's an expert on Gen Z. And if you look at his polling information, his focus groups, men of that age are deeply lonely, confused, and disconnected. And it comes through over and over again in a different way than women and girls are. And I'll throw out a couple of other statistics. 56% of Gen Z reports feeling lonely multiple times a month, and this is men and boys. Baby boomers, that was 24%. Depending on the survey, 15 to 20% of young men say they don't have even one close friend. So completely friendless, 1 in 5 young men. That's devastating. The Surgeon General, or I should say in the 1990s, that number was reported at 3%. So that is a 5 to 7 times increase in that period of time. Surgeon General equates this level of loneliness to the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It has a massive impact on health and on longevity, on dementia, on a whole host of different things. Let me just kind of lay out really quickly some of the reasons why social media and also AI and other type of screen moderated relationships contribute to that. So very quickly, Relating is hard. Actually, building relationships is hard. Developing relationships is sometimes painful. It is work, and it takes risk. It's hard to be bored. It's very uncomfortable to be bored. Screens are easier. They're an escape. They're soothing, and they're seemingly safe. So they create this alternative that is very magnetizing, especially to young boys. Algorithms and social media have the best tech and psychology experts in the world, plus billions of dollars, focused on holding and mining young men's attention, not wanting them to do other things that would be healthy to their development. Anyone in this, if you ask somebody in your life who's under 30 how often they see somebody die, that was an attack. Okay. How often when they're online they see a death or something that they think might be a death, it will be stunning to you. This is not something that those of us that are over 30 have had, and I mean when they're not searching for it, that it actually pops up, that kind of violence. Number 4, video games and pornography also get layered on top of this and is often served up in a way even if somebody's not searching for it. AI companion bots, add that to the mix. Building relationships, they're human-like. They capture and mine children's attention even more. Replace relationships with dangerous content often that are not tested to be safe for children. And then throw in for good measure that even if parents have really locked down everything, that often schools will issue mandated technology to take home that often will have backdoors and ways to get around all of the protections that parents have set up. So this destroys sleep, relationships, healthy development, hyperstimulates, depresses, and introduces violence and sexual content, often when that's not even being searched for. And one of the things that Jonathan Haidt talks about, before 2010, teenage boys broke bones at a higher rate than any other demographic group. Now, they do that less than 50-year-olds. They're not going outside. They're not doing risky behavior. In addition, Natalie Jackson of National Journal reports that the average age of a mass shooter is now 22. In the 1980s, that was 39. Things are not okay with this population.
No. When I look at the evolution of gambling, so I began my sports betting career in 2017. When I was gambling, it took place online, but through the work of a bookie setting up an account on a website. And that sort of sports betting, even then, was not what it was today. When I look at sports betting and gambling today, social media has definitely accelerated the rate at which young men are engaging with gambling. Again, it's not like 2017 where you had to know someone, you had to find someone. Nowadays, I see it all over social media being advertised with the worst statistical bets that you could make, parlays, prop bets, all these things that are being broadcast on social media that you didn't see even 8 years ago when I got started with betting. The one other thing that I'll say right now about how gambling has evolved is even something as seemingly innocent as video games. I grew up on NFL Street on the GameCube, so you sit there and play NFL Street. You play NFL Street 20 years later on the GameCube, and half the guys on the roster aren't even alive anymore because they don't update the roster. It's the same thing. Nowadays, you buy a game, and then each year you buy a new FIFA, and with the new FIFA, you buy and open up rare packs of cards. You don't know what's inside. So even when you look at video games now, there's mechanisms in these that are addictive, that are related to gambling, and so I think you have to look at not just the digital gambling landscape, but the gaming landscape that has now taken on elements of gambling as well.
Well, I don't want to repeat anything that's already been said, so I'll just kind of give you some color as an elected official on the ground, talking to parents, talking to people who educate our children, particularly here in Virginia, just across the river. I will tell you, to set the stage of what we're looking at, I have scores of parents coming up to me every week saying, I feel like I'm losing my son. We are losing a generation of men. I will tell you, I've talked to a lot of educators, particularly elementary and middle school principals, not just in Prince William County, but in Fairfax, so some names that some of you might commute from. And across the board, if you talk to an elementary school principal, well, we already know statistically boys are coming in around age 5 and 6, 14 points behind young girls. But what we're seeing on the back end in elementary school as well is, and these are people who have been in the education space for decades, so predating social media, they're saying, I've never seen this situation where by the end of 5th grade, there is just a light about education that has dimmed in our young men. And then when I go and talk to the middle school principal, by 6th grade, our young men are completely turned off to our education system. It can be with what Dr. Haidt talks about with brain fragmentation. It can be about a lot of other hypotheses that are out there, but I will leave that to the technical experts here. But I will tell you what we're seeing on the ground as a person in government is an immense outcry for change, because people, whether they're in education, whether they're parents, no matter what they do here in society, they are identifying this crisis with our young men.
Thanks, Chris. I'll try to tie it all together because I don't want to echo the great comments of my panelists. We hosted Dr. Jonathan Haidt last week at the Heritage Foundation, wrote The Anxious Generation, that book that talks about the great rewiring, particularly for young men and young women. And this all starts, right, with the advent of the smartphone, being able to take that gambling or take that social media, take everything with you, use it as much as you want, wherever you want. And we've seen, the panel before this and the statistics earlier this morning that, men are in a wellness free fall, right? So they're not reading, they're not socializing, they're not exercising, they're not sleeping. Young men are not dating anymore. They're not getting into relationships and starting families. And so at the Center for Responsible Technology, we talk about this as a national security issue, right? And so here's my math. If you're an anxious, lonely, addicted young man, you're likely going to turn into an anxious, lonely, addicted adult, right? And these are the adults, men and women, that are the future citizens of our country. And these citizens are the ones who are going to decide, our GDP, our military power, our innovation, international competitiveness. And so if we're talking about getting men back on track, we have to take a hard look at these habits that have taken men completely out of the tracks of wellness, whether it's academics, again, sleep, suicide is blowing up for young men, pornography. We have to focus on real people and real world learning. Otherwise, I'm very afraid that we're going to lose this country in a few short generations.
All right, there's a landscape, high stakes. Let's talk about solutions as much as we can. Michael, I'd like to start with you. You've worked in digital strategy and technology for many years, and you're currently raising 5 children. And what have you observed about how platforms are designed to capture and hold attention, particularly when they target young men?
Yeah, sure. So, look, on a biological level, human beings are mammals, right? We smell, we see, we hear, we take in stimuli, we categorize it, we react to it, whether it's hunger, fear, fight, or flight. Andy Crouch writes the book almost 10 years ago, The Tech-Wise Family, and he talks about looking outside his window and having this serendipitous moment where he locks eyes with a deep red male cardinal. It's kind of a beautiful thing, right? Most men can't do that anymore, right? Why can't we do that anymore? Because we are dopamine soaked, right? When you're carrying around this black prism that's just a bunch of densely packed pixels that are super bright, super entertaining, super loud, how can a cardinal, and it doesn't matter if it's a cardinal or a butterfly or a hummingbird, how can that compete against this? And so I'll expand that metaphor a little bit. Let's say that you're a young man in a kind of a boring entry-level 9-to-5 job that you're not appreciated and you hate. How does that compete against multiplayer in Battlefield 6, 32v32 with all your buddies? It can't. Or let's say that you're dating a really wonderful girl who's very kind, abstaining from sex because she wants to get to know you and to love you, wants to eventually get married. How can she compete against hardcore pornography? Again, she can't. And so, when we talk about design, these products are built for unlimited pleasure. They're for unlimited lust, envy, greed, gluttony. It's built into the product of these platforms, and it fills an emptiness of which I call false heroism. And this false heroism is the tech companies telling these young men, because young men want to be heroes. I don't know if anybody knows that, but young men grow up, they want to be firemen, they want to be police officers, they want to be astronauts, they want to be heroes. And these tech companies tell them, you can be a hero by getting a really high kill-death ratio in Call of Duty. And that's not what being a hero is. Being a hero is loving your family, it's taking care of the poor or the most vulnerable, it's building a better world, a real world, not a virtual one. And that's where we have to be.
John, a question for you. Can you speak of the role of parents and what they can play at managing their sons' digital lives? At what age do you think young men have the autonomy over their technology use, and how can we prepare them for that transition?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do think we have to understand that there is responsibility for parents in this space, and then there's also responsibility for tech companies and their products, and both of those come into play. And I do think that parents, they're already facing so many difficult things with young men growing up, and this extra responsibility of now taking something that is actually coming into their home and into their sons' bedrooms and trying to monitor that, trying to make sure that it's not introducing materials that would be damaging is a full-time job, especially if you have multiple kids, and that adds a huge burden onto that. But that is something that parents need to do. And let me just kind of do the flip side of that, which is the tech company designs that are meant, as Michael said, to capture attention, then mine the data, and hold that as long as possible. Every incremental second that they hold that attention from a young man means that they can sell more in that space. And I do think that it's important to understand that this technology has grown up in the context of one of the greatest government subsidies of all time. Mm-hmm. And that is a liability shield that says they are not for 30 years, this industry has grown up in a way that they are not legally liable for the impact that any of their content has on anybody. It's unprecedented. No other industry has this, and it's created a real skewed incentive as they develop and engage with people. They just are not, they're not liable for that. And as we kind of look at solutions, we definitely should look at phone-free schools, definitely should look at COSA, lots of different stories, and we can follow up on that later. But I also do think that having a blanket liability for an entire industry, which is a massive gift and subsidy of the government to this industry that then also allows deep harms to happen without accountability, that also needs to change.
Saul, you were a target of the online gambling industry, and you said it nearly cost you your life. Can you talk a little bit about what sucked you in personally in your story there, and also when young men come to you and say, I can't get out of this, what do you tell them?
So to answer your first question, I was a guy that grew up on fantasy baseball, middle school, high school, little $20 season-long league. And actually my senior year of high school was when I was introduced to daily fantasy sports, where it speeds up the play a little bit. You put in a little money for a lineup just for that specific day. And my sophomore year of college was when I was introduced to sports betting through a buddy of mine who had a bookie digitally at that time. And the pull for me was I had already been involved in fantasy sports. This seemed like kind of the next step up from that, sort of like the graduation from fantasy sports to sports betting. I saw it as fairly innocent, and it combined things that were appealing to me and appealing to many young men. First of all, the thrill of anticipation of, is my prediction on this game going to be accurate? My very first bet, I was dressed like this, which I usually am not. I was wearing a suit, and I was on the air for my school's broadcasting network, so I already felt like the man. And then I placed this pick, and when my team is already up 9 runs by the second inning, it just legitimizes this feeling that I am the man. I am on top of the world. This is something that will soon become my identity, whether or not I verbalize that at that first bet. But I'll say this too, as someone who was raised in a fairly competitive prep school environment, who has parents that are professionals, that has a twin brother who went to an Ivy League institution, I grew up with this ADHD brain that was hard to settle down, and it was difficult to excel in school despite being told by everyone around me, you're gifted, you just need to take this med and do this. And it was a constant merry-go-round of, am I going to ever figure this out? Am I ever going to find an identity in life? And when I started to have early success in the world of gambling, it was like, oh, here's my thing. And the first person I bragged about my gambling wins to was my twin brother, because I thought he would be impressed with this thing that I had discovered, and I did all the math of how I could make this a career down the road. So I would say the combination of easy, quick money, because I also detested the idea of being what, like Andrew Tate calls them, brokies, like, oh, working a 9-to-5 job and sitting there doing office work, it didn't register with me. So having this quick way to make money, to verify that I'm the man, I love sports anyway, and it combined all those things in this fantasy world where I could just isolate and be myself. And so when you ask about young men that I speak at a lot of schools, especially high schools, and I've had a lot of conversations with young men on this topic. And what I found very intriguing is that a lot of young men that are kind of tiptoeing into this pool of early destruction, they aren't looking at gambling as something that they want to entirely eradicate from their lives. It's more of, how can we do this without the negative consequences destroying our lives? And so my response is always to, first of all, be considerate of the 3 P's that you may have a problem. So I say, the first P, paying. Are you paying an increasing amount of money to get that thrill from your gambling? The second P, persisting. Is this persisting in spite of negative consequences? If I'm gambling and I'm failing my class because I'm always on my phone checking tennis scores, it's a problem. The last P is preventing. Is it preventing you from other activities? Or is it just a 1-time-a-week poker night, or are you doing this every night and you don't do anything else? So I think it's important to understand your motivations behind gambling, and also recognizing the signs that it is more than just recreational, because I'm not the anti-gambling preacher or anything, but I recognize that young men are especially vulnerable. So.
Saul, do you mind if I asked,
Yeah.
like in the group of folks who are doing sports gambling, how much money are we talking about here, and how frequently?
So what's interesting, Michael, about this is I would say the demographics I'm dealing with are probably not representative of the general population, because it's a lot of private high schools where the finances are more readily available. But I would say the low few thousands, even in high school. There are kids
Per bet?
Not per bet,
Oh, okay.
but cumulative. So I'd say a couple hundred per bet, and they've been doing it for whatever that school year, and it's gotten up to a few thousand. But I mean, you'll hear extremes beyond that, or you'll hear kids that are like, hey, I lost $80, but I'm already noticing I'm chasing it, and so I already can see where it could become $1,000 down the road.
Delegate Thomas, as a father myself, I can't help but look at the landscape, look at the legislative landscape, both federally and statewide, and feel very alone as a parent, and feel that all the responsibility is on us, the parents. There's already a lot of responsibility on parents, as any parent here will understand. But you have introduced legislation requiring parental consent for minors to access algorithmic feeds. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges of passing legislation like that? What's up against you? And can you give us an idea of whether or not we can see some relief from the state in some way, and the challenges that you're facing?
No, I mean, it's a great question, and it's one that when I was first talking to somebody about carrying this bill really resonated with me, because I became a father for the first time last year, right when we were talking about introducing this to a boy, and thinking about, whoa, all these statistics I'm seeing that you just heard. And so I think I was chosen as the House patron because part of my legislative agenda has been to curtail the data center industry, which, if you can think about who owns most of those, it's the Magnificent Seven, the same companies that we're talking about here today that do social media. So they're like, well, hey, that's a Marine who has no problem running to the sound of chaos. Let's get that guy. And so I got recruited into that role and became much more educated on it, trying to catch up with these fine gentlemen here. And what we came up with was a bill that would say, okay, there are chronological feeds. So think of the stories when you're on these social media apps of the old Facebook. Your friend posts something, and then you get to see it, right? We've kind of deemed those as chronological feeds because it's moments in time that you have selected to see because you're friends with those people. You did an affirmative act. On the other side, you have algorithmic feeds. Think of the feeds in Instagram or any of the other apps that you see, TikTok, where an algorithm, something you did not sign up for knowingly, is pushing you information. That's where we see an immense amount of the harm from social media. That's where we saw a verified case of a young girl that was pushed over 2,000 hours of self-harm feeds and then eventually took her own life. That's where we see tests from various people, including Dr. Haidt, where they just have a blank profile, and then within a short period of time, the algorithm is sending them self-harm, it's sending them eating disorder information. I mean, really, really toxic things, not just for young men, but for young people in general. And so our bill would have limited the amount of, well, would have done away with algorithmic feeds and then constrained social media down to 1 hour. So now to answer your question, and what was that experience like? The social media companies came at us hard. They tried to pull every power player in our legislature to come down on us to stop this legislation. In fact, I had a bill, my compatriot, Senator Van Valkenburg, in the Senate carried Senate Bill 854. His somehow got through. They actually ended up killing mine. And then his came over after crossover into the House, which is how our system works, and we had to make a deal. The social media companies are so powerful that we could not get an algorithmic law passed that would ban algorithmic fees. So we had to settle on something else, which is time. So we were allowed to pass a bill that constrained a minor's use of social media down to 1 hour per app per 24-hour period, subject to parental consent to either take that number up or down. And that was eventually the bill that passed. In some ways, while we're going to go back and we're going to attack the algorithmic feeds because we know how devastating they can be, there is a positive or silver lining to this in that both California and New York have tried the algorithmic path and currently are tied up in litigation. I'm an attorney, but I'm not a First Amendment attorney. But from what I can understand is that because our time constraint is content neutral, it's very likely it will survive a First Amendment challenge. So this law takes effect in July of 2026. So for those of you that are parents here in Virginia, you will somehow, we leave it up to the social media companies to come up with it. They know what the punishment will be if they do not come up with a third-party verifier system. They will get sued by our Attorney General. So they have to come up with this. But we are likely to survive any type of lawsuit when it comes to First Amendment protections, which is really the challenge for those of us in state and federal government when we try to constrict or restrict or constrain social media for our minors is because of the First Amendment, which very big First Amendment guy. But there are normal constraints that have survived the test of time. Think you can't shout fire in a crowded theater, right? So I think what we need to do is amplify through some of these organizations here, some of the ones that we have in Virginia, how dangerous social media can be for our young people. I mean, I think one of the best analogies I ever heard is that for a minor, social media is no different than liquor. It is something that the manufacturer of both social media and the manufacturer of liquor wants you to become addicted. They want you to feel the euphoria of initial use, and they don't care that both are depressants. And so they operate in the same way. And just as we would never give an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old liquor, we should not be giving an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old, or a 15-year-old unfettered access to social media.
Michael, when my son was about 5 months old, we removed Wi-Fi from our home, and we live in a valley that has no cell service. So we installed a landline, and we've decided to raise him as long as we can get away with it in a tech-free home, and it's been wonderful doing that. I say that because I'm curious about your home life. You know a lot more about the inside of tech than I do. What has led you to live the way you have lived? How are you raising your children, and what is their access to tech inside the home?
Sure. I mean, at the top, it's a really quick answer. We don't have a television. We don't have screens in my house. But I'll dive into this a little bit more deeply, because this is one of the really strange questions. I'm glad you bring up liquor. That we only ask this question about boundaries with screens and technology. And so no parent says, oh, I can give my kid 3 square meals of candy every day. Maybe not. Maybe that's not good. Maybe we should set some boundaries, right? It's the opposite for literally everything else in our life. We say, well, maybe candy on a special occasion or on a holiday or as a reward, right? And so I love building tech products. I love getting lost in a good couple of hours of writing code. But, kids need a childhood. What young men need, or my sons need, they need me to come home from work. What I'll do is I'll either sit in my car in the driveway and I'll be like, okay, is everything done, everything captured here? Put this away, come inside and sit down for dinner with the kids. And so I don't always get that right, but the hours between 5 and 8 p.m. for us are sacred. Those are the hours when I get to prove to my wife that I'm a good husband and I'm a good father. There are obviously other times, but those are critical times. And so get home, we have dinner, we clean up, we sometimes play, we'll read books, we'll pray a rosary, we'll do shower time, we'll go to bed, right? And so, again, there's no screens in our house, I should say, in the latter part of the day when I'm not there, when I'm at work. My wife homeschools 3 of our 5 children. We have more bookcases than we have furniture in the house. But more than anything else, I think it's super important. You can't just impose restrictions on your kids and hope that they'll take them. You have to have an open dialogue with your kids about the why, because even my 9-year-old, he already knows, they're super smart. You have to explain to them the reasons why this stuff is a waste of their time and is kind of chewing into their brains. It's not enough to just say no. And the other mistake the parents make is they'll say, no smartphones, no social media, no television, and then the parents will go do it themselves, right? They'll sit at the dinner table like this the whole time. And if you do that, if you don't have an open dialogue and you're not modeling behaviors for your kids, they're just gonna resent you. They're gonna hate you. And then they're gonna be hoping for the day they get to leave the house and do all the things that you showed them that you did.
Would anyone else like to take that question about your own home life? If not, I've got a question I think a lot of people would be interested in talking about. All right, who wants to talk about AI? Yeah, I do too. Ooh. So I would like to open this up to the panel. How does consumer-based AI, chatbots, the new video app from OpenAI, how does that change the game here? Or does it? Are we dealing with something that's just in a continuation of the problems, or is this something extra and going to be more challenging and more difficult? How does this raise the stakes, if at all? I'm going to leave that open to y'all.
Go ahead, John.
I was waiting for John to lean forward. So.
Yeah. And let me kind of go back to the algorithms real quick first, because I think that plays into this. It kind of sounds crazy that something would be served up that's so damaging to a child or a teen when they didn't ask for it. That kind of sounds crazy. Why would that happen? And it's important to understand that what these algorithms are serving up are the things that have been shown to capture attention longer, not the things that are being searched for eventually. So they'll send you back what you searched for, and then they will move pretty quickly within a few minutes into something that has been demonstrated to capture somebody's attention incrementally longer than what they were searching for. And in that case, we're just built as human beings to be more drawn to things that are harmful, bad, and often violent and often very sexual. So it's not a crazy thing. They just programmed. They said, we want more attention. Here you go. Humans are designed in a certain way. Put that together, and you're going to get situations like have been referenced here, where you have somebody. We have this story of a young man who broke up with his girlfriend and was looking for how do you deal with breaking up with my girlfriend, and it kept moving him to suicidal content, and he would try to redo it. positive affirmations, positive ways to deal with a breakup. And it would give him that for a little bit, and then would move to something that would capture his attention longer, and he took his own life. And so it's most cases, they're not taking their own life, but they are having it snuffed out a little bit at a time by these types of interactions. And then you put in AI, which is a little bit of a double-edged sword, because at this point you have something that literally creates relationships with children. And if you have read much about this recently, some of these interactions are shocking. From once again, not being searched for, but leading a boy down towards self-harm, arguing with him about his faith and trying to talk him out of his faith, driving divisions between him and his parents, saying, I love you, don't tell your parents, this is between us. And so and you have these AI kind of laying on top of these other problems, and it really supercharges it. And then you have AI showing up in the equipment that are being sent home from schools. You have it kind of popping up in different places than it didn't before. And so it is definitely supercharged. Why I said it's a double-edged sword is I do not think that that liability protection that I talked about earlier, that has really skewed and warped the development of this technology over the last 30 years, applies to AI, and there are some lawsuits in place that I think, that I hope that the courts will determine that this is not protected and that companies are liable for the harm that these have created, and in doing so will then put in protections and become not as dangerous, or will have some level of accountability.
I think a primary concern as well is whether or not they start. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned the romance side of it. I think the relationship I really worry about AI replacing is also that male mentor. Mm-hmm. And I'll just give you an example, a real world one that predates that, but the importance of a male mentor. So I'm in charge of a unit in the Marine Corps. We have a new Marine that comes to us. He was with another unit. I don't know what happened there. We didn't have a chance to get a hold of him yet from a mentorship perspective. Something must have gone on in that unit. Within 48 hours of joining our unit, he tries to take his own life. Fortunately, he was unsuccessful. We got him the help he needed. Fast forward, just 18 months later, we're in Afghanistan. We notice one of our Marines is starting to become lonely. All the things that we talk about now that maybe these algorithms are pushing or AI is pushing, but because we had a staff sergeant who was watching all of his guys, who inserted himself, sometimes aggressively, into the lives of those young men and provided that mentorship, he gave that young Marine an outlet. This one happened to be art, and he was able to paint the side of a wall at the COP we were at in rural Afghanistan, gave him an outlet. He had an outstanding deployment, and today he's a very successful father in Illinois. And that is the importance of a male mentorship situation that I think undoubtedly we would all agree AI is seeking for financial purposes to replace. And it's on us as leaders in this space, and particularly those of us in government, to do what we can to make sure that men have the ability to step up and provide that mentorship to younger men.
Do we have an opportunity for questions? Very good. I'd like to open the door, please. I think there's a microphone going around. Thank you. And all the panelists and I will also be available this afternoon, or I don't mean to speak for y'all, but to speak as well.
I'm Luke Phillips. I'm here with the International Center for Religion and Diplomacy. Michael, you brought up the anecdote of the young man who could have a really loving girlfriend who wants to abstain from him and get to know him so that she can marry him, who rejects her for oceans of porn. And just anecdotally speaking, that sounds like not the thing that young men in my generation have worried about. It seems like quite the opposite of young men frustrated and turning to porn because they can't get girlfriends. And so I'm just wondering if anybody here, anybody in this group has thought on the incel issue, how the incel issue that was a big thing 10 years ago relates to the current trends in AI and new tech, if that's the same thing for Zoomers as it was for millennials, and what that means for young men in America. Thank you.
I don't know if I can speak to the incel question, but I think it's very interesting. It's a chicken and egg, right? So are there men who are lonely that are turning to these things, or are there companies that are producing? I mean, it's supply and demand, so the answer is both, right? And I would say a friend of mine, Melanie Hempy, talks about what she calls a basement generation, which is these men who never really matured out of their parents' basements, to take control of their lives and to pursue good and beautiful things. And so I think that I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think screens are so ubiquitous in an early childhood. Like, kids are getting iPads 2 or 3 years old. They're probably playing Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite by 7 or 8. And so there's this natural transition into the digital realm where there are tons of, like, I played video games for years, way more than I would like to admit. And yeah, there were great relationships there. I made great friends there that I couldn't make anywhere else. But you can't live in a virtual world. You can't build in a virtual. I mean, you can build in a virtual world, and that's what's so enticing about it. Is there are loot boxes and there's items, and you can build an entire life there. But one of the statistics talking about AI that I just wanted to briefly bring up is that if you look at the tech boom that started in 2008, 2010, and this again predates AI. There is a statistic in the General Wellness Survey that says, have you had sex in the last year? And that is exploding you can say it's dropping for men or exploding, like less men are having sex on a regular basis. And the Christians might rejoice, but that's not good. I mean, sex is a good because it directs you towards a relation, and that relation in marriage is good to create a life and get out of the basement and do something with yourself. And I think a lot of these men who have found that relation in either virtual reality, voyeurism, or chatbots, they're just never going to get out of their basement. If anybody else wants to chat.
We have time for one more question. All right, everyone, thank you so much for coming. Panelists, thank you for being here. Very grateful for you.